and 2 quotes from Brian Swimme. This is the greatest discovery of the scientific enterprise. You take hydrogen gas and you leave it alone, and it turns into rosebuds, giraffes, and humans. And 4 billion years ago, the planet Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Friends, this is ancient wisdom and holy word.
Thanks be to all that is wise and holy.
All creation is wisdom and holy word.
All creation sings the wisdom of God. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Well, after growing up in a small town in the rural Midwest and then attending a small college, I decided I needed something bigger. So I moved to Manhattan at age 22. I loved nearly everything about New York City in the 1980s before it got cleaned up and almost gentrified to death. I loved the subway. I loved walking all over the island, dancing at late-night dives in the East Village, free events in Central Park, poetry readings and modern dance at local churches, working with the unhoused population at one of my churches and a food advocacy group at the other, eating every imaginable ethnic food and continually experiencing the whole wide world at my doorstep when I walked to work each morning. I walked around New York in an almost constant state of awe and delight, the proverbial country cousin in the big city. One Sunday morning, some friends and I decided to head down to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine for worship. Now, St. John the Divine is one of the 5 largest churches in the world. Take that in for a moment. It's really big. Turned out that we had picked the Feast of St. Francis to attend. And like Jubilee, the cathedral has an annual blessing of the animals on that Sunday. So as we took our seats, we realized that we were surrounded by animals. Dogs, cats, birds, hamsters, snakes. Those last 2 really shouldn't be sitting close to each other. The cathedral was filled with hundreds of humans and hundreds of other creatures. And then the processional began. And down this enormous cathedral's central aisle began a parade of every kind of animal. I mean, all kinds of animals. Horses, sheep, goats, llamas, a giraffe, an elephant. Animals large and small solemnly processing down the middle of the room to the altar at the front. It was like nothing I had ever seen. And accompanying the procession were the artist in residence, the Paul Winter Consort. It sounds like some of you know the Paul Winter Consort. How many of you know the Paul Winter Consort? I know this guy does. Well, I didn't until that moment, and I became immediately enthralled. The Paul Winter Consort is one of the earliest exponents of world music. The group pioneered earth music, or ecological jazz, interweaving classical, jazz, and world music with voices from nature, what Winter calls the greatest symphony of the earth. They're renowned for their winter and summer solstice celebrations and for incorporating earth sounds, from wind and water to whales and wolves, into their music. And on that first Sunday of October each year at the cathedral, they perform their Earth Mass. If I thought that walking around Manhattan brought me into awe and delight, I hadn't seen nothing yet. I mean, every one of my senses was fully engaged. And before the end of worship, Winter had the entire congregation howling like wolves. I still get chills thinking about it. That day, in that magnificent architectural artifice with the sights and sounds and smells of hundreds of creatures and the reverberations of that jazz mass, both earthy and otherworldly. I was in a full-bodied via positiva moment. Awe, delight, joy, gratitude. Now, you don't have to attend that intense an event to be plunged into the via positiva. A ruby-throated hummingbird might do it. Or the sound of your baby cooing with infant pleasure. Or the sudden sweetness of your lover's finger softly touching your arm. Or the first bite of a strawberry in spring. Or the sound of an old friend on the phone. Take a deep breath. And remember such a moment in your life. Close your eyes. Feel it in your body. Breathe it in. A via positiva moment. Awe. Delight. Joy. Gratitude. This is the via that brings us into the presence of original blessing, that awakens us to the goodness of life, the goodness of this moment, the goodness of our own souls. I suspect that everyone here today has had many such moments right here in this room. Take a moment and remember such a moment right here at 46 Wall Street. A via positiva moment. Breathe it in. The four paths, like the four directions, is that life is never stagnant. We don't stay in the via positiva forever. Heck, we probably couldn't even handle it if we did. Being fully in love with life, grateful, joyful, delighted with goodness, inevitably leads to the experience of loss. Like the leaves falling off the trees, we have to let go. We let go of people we love through death or distance. We let go of places we've loved. We let go of jobs, self-image, the illusion of control. Even though we're still in the via positiva on our Sunday schedule, everywhere I've been lately, people are experiencing the loss and grief that comes with it. And even if we haven't been personally beset with recent losses, we're aware of the losses around us in the world. Rising COVID deaths, spreading wildflowers, flooding rivers, earthquakes, hurricanes, suicide bombs, the extinction of species, and all that these global incidents imply for our future. When we turn toward the west with the calling of the directions, we see the setting sun, the final harvest of the year, the emptying out of the trees. This is the journey of the negativa. Now, we live in a culture that does not do grief well or easily. Some of us were taught to suck it up. Some of us have a spirituality that wants us to stay positive all the time. Some of us believe there's a timeline for grief, a time when it can come and a time when it needs to go. But grief will have its way with us, whether we like it or not. It doesn't always show up for us as sadness. It can show up as anger or guilt, shame or blame. It can show up as fear or anxiety, and even sometimes utter despair. Maureen Linneman and I have been part of a team leading ego grief circles over the past 18 months, and we're now working on a curriculum and leadership training program for them. We came together with several other folks, all pastors or chaplains or counselors, who were experiencing in ourselves and seeing in others a sense of overwhelm at the reality of climate change. And all of us had been climate activists in one way or another at one time or another, and each of us was sort of nearing despair that years or even decades of activism had not moved our global family in the direction that would save us from the ravages of climate change that we find ourselves in the midst of now. So our motivation for starting these ego grief groups came from a belief that until we had entered fully into the grief, we would not be able to move back into action. And we trusted that by entering the grief, naming it, feeling it, sharing it, we might find our way through to a new form of activism, a new level of inspiration. This is exactly the journey of the Via Negativa. The Negativa is a time we allow the emptiness, the darkness, the uncertainty to have its way with us. We often long to bypass this via. We fear that if we enter it, we may never come out of it. Have you ever been afraid to cry because you were afraid if you started, you might not stop? The beauty of the four paths of creation spirituality is that the Negativa is not the end of the journey. Just as fall is not the season to end all seasons, nor the harvest the last possibility of crops, future crops, the Negativa is not entering the end. But sometimes it feels that way. So take a breath and sink into a moment of letting go that you've experienced in your own life. And for just a moment, let yourself feel that loss. In this very community, we're experiencing a lot of letting go. Patrick Fitzsimmons extended his one-year contract from May through August, but we'll be moving on this week. And Patrick hasn't been able to be with us these past 2 Sundays because he's been caring for his elderly parents who are sick with COVID. And I learned this morning that this may be his mom's last week with us on this plane, this earth. Today is Daniel's last Sunday as our weekly band leader, and we'll take time, as we said, next week to bless and honor his 20 years in this position. So central to the life of this place and these Sunday mornings. My interim ministry with you will also come to an end later this year. And on top of all of the losses that we feel still so raw, Howard and Don's retirement, Amy's coming and going, the pre-COVID energy of a full rockin' house on Sunday mornings. Just take a moment and breathe in the reality of letting go of so much of what Jubilee has been. In the directions and in the 4 seasons, we turn from the emptiness, the uncertainty of the West, the letting go of autumn, into the cold and depths of the North. It might feel even more like death. It may look and feel that way at moments. This is that move from the negativa into the creativa. Now, creativa sounds so nice and bright. Who doesn't want to be creative? And maybe it will be a cheery time. But first, it is deep and it is dark. It's the root time, the time when the sap leaves the top of the trees and flows downward. It's quiet time, listening time, a time of integration and assimilation. It's the digestive tract of the vias, absorbing all the nutrients of all we've taken in and all we've lost. The creativa invites passion. The passion of conceiving new ideas and the passion of bringing them into the world. Creativa is the gestation and the birthing time. What wants to get born is getting in position near the birth canal. Bringing it forth is a time of risk. Will it survive the birthing? Will we? Are we ready to enter into the labor, the pushing, the opening up of what that's required of us to bring this into the world? Ooh, pause and breathe. Is there something in your life wanting to be born? Can you imagine what's being formed, what's growing? Where is your passion? Where is your passion? Sometimes this global pandemic has felt like a negativa and sometimes a creativa, and I think it's been both. A letting go and a gestation. Uncertainty and possibility. And it's been that for this community too. Jubilee entered this pandemic already in a bit of trauma, and the isolation from each other required more letting go, more uncertainty, more emptiness, more negativa. And yet this time also holds possibility. The digging deep to discover the passion at our core. The quiet of the womb before the chaos of birthing. Creativa. Let me tell you about this week for me. Last Sunday, while Candace was here speaking to you, I spoke at Jubilee Circle in Columbia, and it was delightful. There I was in a different city, a different setting, with a different band, with the Jubilee vibe moving through it all. Jubilee is bigger than 46 Wall Street. Then on Monday, I gathered in this space with several current board members as the new board chair, Laura Ann Billings, led us through a brainstorming process of what might be next for Jubilee. And ideas flowed, both simple and wild. And then on Tuesday, we had our usual staff meeting with this team imagining this Sunday and beginning to think about the next via, envisioning how to bring music and ritual, visual and verbal beauty to you. And on Wednesday, I met with the retreat planning team for this afternoon's event, and the energy of ideas swirled. 4 days, 4 different groups of people, all birthing aspects of the passion that is Jubilee. I felt immersed in creativa all week, having had quite a negativa just the week before as I prepared to share with you my leaving date. And somehow I believe that one led to the other. When we empty ourselves in the negativa, we create space to gestate the future. So where is your passion for Jubilee? Are you ready to get down and dirty and conceive it? What gets your sap flowing? And what labor is required to bring it into birth? Take a moment. What's your passion for Jubilee? Then comes Transformativa. Now, nothing about this journey is linear, so we can never predict exactly how the flow is going to go. But there is a pattern we can see in the universe. Spring follows winter. We see the pattern in the Christ story as well, from the miracles and joy of the positiva to the emptying out of the crucifixion in a stark example of negativa, to the darkness of the tomb in the creativa. And finally, we get to resurrection, transformativa. The beauty and the terror of the transformativa is that we can't force it. We can't control it. We can't make it happen. We can't resurrect ourselves. The transformativa is a time when all the joy of the positiva, all the emptying out of the negativa, all the underground passion of the creativa burst into life as something new, something healing, justice, undying love. Now, the followers of Jesus didn't recognize him after the resurrection. Mary didn't recognize him until he said her name. Thomas didn't recognize him until he touched the wounds. The disciples on the road didn't recognize him until he broke the bread. Apparently, the new Jesus didn't look anything like. Have you known moments of transformativa in your own life? New work out of failure, new love after heartbreak, new life out of death. Let them in. Let them all in. The vision of Jubilee is not just the vision of one man or one small group of people or even 32 years of community. It is a vision of spirit, a vision that came through one man. A vision that grew for 32 years. A vision that is undergoing negativa in a damn big way. And a vision whose time in the negativa may be carving out a space deep enough for the wild and passionate womb of creativa. How can you be in service to this vision? This vision born of spirit, this vision birthed in love, this vision held by grace. Let the vision have its way with you. Trust, 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 trust the transformativa. The path of transformation, the way of resurrection. Breathe deeply.